What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. Ernesto made landfall on Bermuda earlier this morning as a Category 1 hurricane with winds of 85 miles per hour. We have that NHC advisory to show you in just a second. But before I talk a little bit about that, I just want to kind of talk about Ernesto and the historic, not just a historical semblance this means, but also the fact that, this has just been a pretty crazy storm to deal with, just kind of tracking the evolution, first with the dry air intrusions, then it got its act together, then the wind shear started tearing it apart, and now we have a landfall in Bermuda. This is the first hurricane to make landfall on Bermuda since 2014 with Hurricane Gonzalo. So this is the first time in 10 years that a hurricane has officially made landfall. Hurricanes have made close passes, the eyes come ashore, but the center did not. And the Bermuda definitely got some eyeballs. Again, this is like a yearly tradition for them. They get hurricanes every year, from pretty much thanks to the Bermuda High weakening at that point. But Ernesto making landfall is rather historic, as this is the first time in a decade that this has happened, and potentially a sign of things to come. Let's go ahead and show you the advisory that we have pulled up for you right here. Here is the archive for that. For the 5 a.m. It made landfall as an 85 mile per hour Category 1 hurricane, minimum central pressure of 972 millibars. It was moving at 9 miles per hour north-northeast. Hurricane warning remains in effect regardless. Hurricane force winds extended out 70 miles from the center, and tropical storm force winds extended outward 240 miles from the center. So overall, just a pretty interesting situation at this current point. Ernesto is at this current point. It has weakened a little bit coming off of shore. It now has winds of 80 miles per hour. It's still moving at 9 miles per hour, and the minimum central pressure was 974 millibars. So that's just generally some stuff that we're going to have to pay attention to. And yeah, it's been kind of an interesting ride to deal with, as we've been kind of tracking Ernesto as it was moving closer to Bermuda, as it was moving through the Lesser Antilles, as it was bringing a lot of impacts to Puerto Rico, which hundreds of thousands of people were without power and water. So that's hopefully going to get fixed in the next little while. I'm praying for those guys every night that have been dealing with this. Ernesto has just been an interesting storm to deal with. But to be honest, this will probably be the last time we cover Hurricane Ernesto, as after this point, it's not really going to be impacting much land, and at this point, we're going to kind of have to pivot towards the tropical Atlantic in the main development region, because we are still showing more and more signs of development, and the ensemble models are starting to ramp up more and more for tropical development. So we'll show you those in a little bit, but let's go ahead and start with the satellite imagery going out in the Atlantic Ocean. Here's the cliff notes that we're dealing with. We have another tropical wave coming off the coast of Africa right now. I believe that that one is going to be the wave that potentially organizes and develops down the road. We're going to have to pay attention to it. NHC hasn't tagged anything just yet, but ensembles are concerned about this. They're saying, hey, something might be happening pretty shortly. We need to pay attention to this. And I believe that once we get past August 20th, the entire Atlantic is going to light up with tropical development. You know, a lot of people are saying, oh, the dry air is too much. The dry air is too much. That's what's causing all of this period of passiveness to go into August. Well, first of all, here's what we're taking a look at with the dry air. Yes, there is some dry air, but I've been noticing some people comparing it to 2022's hurricane season, where the dry air just kind of choked all development out. Well, in 2022, we had no development in August. It's right now, we've had 2 named systems so far, and we're possibly going to see up to 4 or 5 by the time we get into the end of August, and we get into September. So that's what number one. Number two, the dry air was not nearly as this is dry air right here is. Yeah, there is still a little Sahara dust contributing to it, but the dry air is not nearly as expansive as it was in 2022. So I just wanted to make that point very clear, because in 2022, the dry air was just pretty much encompassing and suppressing everything going on in the main development region and in the Caribbean Sea. The Gulf of Mexico was relatively moist thanks to the mesoscale convection going on over there, but that's how oppressive it was, and that's why we didn't see any tropical development in August. Well, 2024, we've had 2 named storms so far in August. I expect there to be another 2 or 3 going towards the end of August because we have several factors in play. First of all, climatology. Second of all, the MJO is in the eastern Atlantic. Third of all, we have more and more moisture coming off thanks to a very active Sahel monsoon going on. So just figured I'd make that point very clear because yes, there is still some dry air persistent, but I can also show you the true color imagery as well. Yeah, there's actually still some Sahara dust, but a lot of it's getting pushed up to Europe. And the second that the rest of it does, that's when we're going to see everything light up. And based on recent forecasts, we're seeing that possibly starting to pick up, I'd say, by the time we get into past August 20th. And the reason I mention August 20th is because that is the climatological mean where we see that surge of hurricane activity. Remember, it starts off slow to begin with. The first couple of months are always starting off a little bit slow, but then after August 20th is when we see hurricane after hurricane after hurricane after hurricane coming off the Central American Gyre or the main development region or even a monsoonal low in the case of Hurricane Wilma in 2005. So that's kind of what we're seeing right here. It's always been a slow start. It's really always been like this climatologically. However, by the time we get into later in the hurricane season, that's when things are going to pick up. And when I mean later, I mean very quickly later. I mean like in the terms of late August, early September. That's when stuff starts to pick up. That's when the waters are at their peak. That's when the moisture is at its peak. That's when the wind shear is at its lowest. So that's what we're paying attention to. Colorado State University still wants 23 named storms with this. However, the ACE has not changed. The accumulative cyclonic energy has not changed, which means this is going to be, yes, we're going to probably see a lot of named systems, but a lot of these are going to be very high quality storms. We're going to see some tropical storms with this, but we're definitely going to see more hurricanes with this. They're calling for 12 hurricanes based on their latest forecast. And NOAA is having this as a 90% chance of an above active hurricane season as well. So they're very confident that this is going to be more of a second half type of hurricane season in that regard. So we're going to have to pay attention to that. Another thing I want to mention too is I remember back another hurricane season I can compare to in 2019 where similar to this, things started off relatively slow. We had 2 named storms for pretty much the first 2.5 months of August. We've had 5 named storms so far in that time period, but then in late August, we had Tropical Storm Chantal that was pretty much a subtropical in the subtropics, didn't need to worry about it. Then in late August, that's when Dorian started to organize and form. And once Dorian was organizing, developing, and moving towards the Bahamas, that's when we started seeing things light up from the NHC. This was around August 26th in 2019 when this was going on. So that's kind of the general situation. In 2019, we had 19 named storms, 10 hurricanes, several major hurricanes, including Hurricane Lorenzo. That was the easternmost Cat 5 hurricane on record. So just wanted to make that point very quickly. This is a kind of a combination of 2017 and 2019 that I'm noticing because 2017 also started off relatively slow. Then you start seeing one system after another system after another system. And then once Irma was getting its act together, you start seeing Jose form, Katia, and then we just had this continual cycle of hurricanes and tropical cyclones move. That year we had 10 consecutive named storms that got up to hurricane strength. We're already at 2 so far. We had Hurricane Debbie and Hurricane Ernesto. So that's what we're paying attention to in that regard right there. And where we were at in 2017 as well, this was when Hurricane Gert was about to organize and develop and mainly stay out to sea. But then Harvey would start to get its act together around August 20th in the Caribbean Sea, dissipate, and then become an open wave, and then enter the Gulf of Mexico, rapidly organize, and then become a Cat 4 as it approached Texas. So that's the kind of stuff we're paying attention to. So that's enough of the rambling from me. I want a very brief, we're not even going to show you the tracker intensity models in regards to what we were seeing with Ernesto at this current point. It's going to be old news after today's video. So here's the sea surface temperatures that we're paying attention to. SSTs are still very concerning for me to take a look at right here. These are some of the warmest waters I have ever seen. I know 2023 was the warmest ocean temperatures. They had the warmest ocean temperatures on record. 2024 is very close to beating that so far. But what I'm noticing too is it's a lot more concentrated in the Western Atlantic, where in 2023 it was more evenly spread out, and you had higher sea surface temperatures in the Eastern Main Development Region. They weren't a very large change, but because of the ocean space, that's why we had on average the warmest sea surface temperatures on record. And going to the Western Tropical Atlantic, this is very concerning for me to pay attention to. First of all, look at what's going on in the coast of Louisiana right here. 32 plus degrees Celsius waters that expand out hundreds of miles from the Louisiana coast. Granted that a lot of that area is part of the continental shelf, and that's relatively shallow compared to what the rest of the Gulf of Mexico has to offer, but still, we didn't even see contours this expansive with the peak water reading on the chart right here of last year. And we saw that some in the Florida Keys. We saw 100-degree waters across a lot of those areas, but it was very shallow and ultimately would not have made a difference in hurricane season considering how close to land they are. But this expands out hundreds of miles, about 200 miles or so outward, which that's really bad, especially if a tropical system moves through the region and enters into the Gulf of Mexico. Because if it's making a strike towards East Texas or even Louisiana, it moves kind of like where my cursor's moving. It enters that 32-degree water. That could still intensify at that current point. Part of the reason hurricanes don't exactly intensify all the way up into landfall if they make landfall in Louisiana. We saw this with Hurricane Laura in 2020. It got up to 150 miles per hour, but then it kind of halted its intensification due to shallower waters as it was starting to make landfall. And then with Hurricane Ida, it was doing the same thing, but it underwent an eyewall replacement cycle that had a secondary eyewall that was just organizing and developing when it made landfall, and that's the reason it stopped. But with these warm waters, in a hypothetical situation, this could be a situation where a system intensifies all the way up to landfall. This is just hypothetical, not saying it's going to happen, but this is a hypothetical scenario that I have to play out just in case something goes haywire. So that's what we're paying attention to off the coast of Louisiana. Caribbean Sea, insanely warm, 30 plus degrees Celsius across the western tropical Caribbean over here, and at 30 degrees Celsius pretty much encompassing the entire Gulf of Mexico, which is something you're going to have to pay attention to. Atlantic Basin as well, we're seeing very warm waters. Bahamas historically have had the warmest waters in that region as well, and parts of the main development region are getting close to that, but that's something we're going to have to pay attention to later. Let's go ahead and show you the ocean heat content in association with this. OHC continues to be very concerning for me as well, especially in the Caribbean Sea. We're seeing registered OHC values of over 200 in several spots right here. The meter right here maxes out at 175 plus OHC, and I know from other sources we've seen over 200 OHC across a lot of these areas right here, and even in parts of the loop current right there, considering how deep that warm water goes down to. I'm noticing with the eddy, it is starting to weaken a little bit, and we can go ahead and go back a week just to kind of show you this. Yeah, it looks like the eddy over here in the Western Gulf, it has weakened quite a bit, at least in terms of ocean heat content. It's not holding as much, but I am noticing it's kind of starting to spread out a bit more, which if it's evenly spreads out and maybe makes the northwestern corner of the Gulf of Mexico increase from maybe 100 OHC to 125 OHC. That's ultimately, in the long run, going to help with hurricane organization and development, depending on the wind shear and the dry air. I'm just talking in terms of ocean heat content. But another thing you got to pay attention to is how far north this OHC goes. And I can go ahead and kind of give you this example because Ernesto is forecasted to strengthen a bit more before it eventually dissipates and becomes extratropical. Expected to get up to 80 miles per hour, weaken to 75, get up to 80 miles per hour according to the NHC. And they were also, again, before that, they were anticipating that this was going to get down to 80 and then re-intensify up to 90. And part of the reason for that is because of this, all these OHC pockets around 40 degrees north right here. Just for comparison, that's pretty much the equivalent latitude of New York City. So that's just something you need to pay attention to, and that's why the NHC is calling for this for some sort of potential re-intensification before it turns extratropical and dissipates. So that's just something I figured I'd throw out there just to let you guys know, so that way it's probably something I don't think it crosses a lot of people's minds. It didn't even cross my mind until I saw this. But here's the wind shear at this current point in time. Look at the Gulf of Mexico and look at the Caribbean Sea. Primed for development. Yeah, there is still some pockets of wind shear out and about in those regions, but those areas are primed for development already. And that's pretty concerning to take a look at. And granted, wind shear patterns are going to continue to fluctuate a bit more. However, basically, we're not going to see any more of the periods of what we were seeing in the last few weeks, where it was oscillating up, down, up, down, up, down, and just gradually going down on average. We're seeing the wind shear just kind of start to behave in a similar pattern to what we'd see typically. Main development region is a different story. There's a lot of wind shear over there. It's going to be kind of a battle for the next week and a half over there, and that's just something we're going to have to keep tabs on down the road. Before I show you the shear and the moisture forecast, I want to go ahead and show you some of the ensemble runs that we're noticing, because here's the 0Z ensembles that we're paying attention to. We're seeing a lot more of these ensemble runs going, hey, something might be going on here. You might want to pay attention to this very quickly. So, yeah, that's what we're noticing, and we can compare this to the 12Z because we're noticing an uptrend pretty much with every single European run. In that regard, we're seeing more and more ensemble runs. They start off weak initially. However, if the Bermuda High gets its act together and kind of strengthens as many forecasts have anticipated for it, it's going to drive these tropical waves potentially towards better and better conditions, better and better wind shear, better moisture, better water temperatures at that as well, and that's just something you're going to have to keep close tabs on in that regard. So, yeah, just stuff you need to pay attention to, just stuff you need to keep very close eye on. It's something I definitely am. I've been checking the ensemble runs; they're not showing much just yet, but the fact that we're seeing an uptrend already is pretty interesting to say the very least. And considering what the Climate Prediction Center said, that this is going to be a very big area that's going to light up with tropical activity, I am very concerned about this, especially if the Bermuda High continues to strengthen and show the patterns that the forecasts are showing to you, because that could drive more systems at least towards the Lesser Antilles and Puerto Rico and parts of the Greater Antilles and into the Caribbean, where all that OHC is. That's just stuff you're going to have to keep close tabs on. Let's go ahead and I want to show you the GFS ensembles as well, just to show you. Even the GFS ensembles are starting to pick up on it to some extent. Let's go ahead and show you the 12Z, because they weren't showing too much, and now they're showing more scenarios going on. Let's go ahead and pull those up. They're showing more scenarios and moving them further and further to the west as that Bermuda High continues to strengthen and drive these ensembles further to the west. So we are seeing an ensemble change right there, and it's just something you need to pay attention to. Let's go ahead and show you the shear and the moisture forecast right here. Let's go ahead and start with the shear right here. Like I said before, the shear is going to be kind of a bit of a problem in the eastern main development region. Doesn't mean tropical development's not going to happen in the Atlantic. It's more or less probably going to be more situated on the western half of the Atlantic instead of the eastern half in the MDR. The Cape Verde hurricanes that are all infamous for, I'm sure, a lot of people in the Carolinas, considering that's what Hurricane Florence did. That's not going to start until probably early September, so you don't really need to be concerned about that. But ultimately, the wind shear patterns are going to be interesting, and the wind shear does subside a little bit in some regions right here. However, it's ultimately it's still somewhat existent, especially in the southern side of the main development region. Not saying it's going to inhibit development too much. Europeans already operationally calling for a low pressure system to get its act together in the next 7 days or so, and that's pretty concerning to say the very least. So that's the shear forecast. Let's go ahead and show you the moisture component to all this. Moisture component's pretty interesting as well. Yes, there is some dry air going on. However, that dry air continues to subside and continues to show in less intensity right there, and it kind of gets more and more broken up as more of it gets pushed over to Europe, especially with the Sahara dust as well. You're seeing that breakdown of dry air in the next few days or so. So that's just kind of what I was anticipating right there. And this is kind of a more of a hurricane season-like pattern where there are some patches of dry air and some patches of moist air, but ultimately the moist air is going to be where the systems are going to be at, and depending on the wind shear, that's going to kind of determine on how this whole season will play out. We're closing the video out right here. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us get more people engaged with weather. If you want to come hang out with us at Storms United, be sure to join our Discord server. Link to that is right over there. Shout out to Daniel as an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor channel. If you'd like to be an official sponsor as well, be sure to join my Patreon. It's the first link in the description down below. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.